My name is Tara Sullivan, and for 3 years, I let my brother-in-law humiliate veterans at every family gathering while I bit my tongue and smiled politely. He had no idea I outranked half the officers at Fort Bragg. He didn't know that the quiet woman sitting across from him at Thanksgiving, nodding through his speeches about military waste and freeloading soldiers, held enough authority to end careers with a single signature. But when he shoved an 82-year-old Korean War veteran to the ground at a charity gala and laughed about it, I stopped being quiet. I stopped being polite, and I made sure the entire room, including a three-star general, knew exactly who I was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The whole thing started on a Saturday night in late October. The air had that sharp chill that makes you pull your jacket tighter, and the ballroom at the Riverside Convention Center glowed warm through its tall glass windows. I'd been invited to the annual Veterans Relief Fund Gala by Marcus Greene, a retired master sergeant who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before a roadside bomb took his left leg below the knee. Marcus ran a small nonprofit helping homeless vets find housing and job training. He wasn't flashy about it, no social media campaigns, no celebrity endorsements. Just steady, unglamorous work that saved lives one apartment lease at a time. I wore a simple black dress, low heels, hair pulled back in a neat bun. Nothing that screamed military, nothing that hinted at rank. In my civilian life, I worked as a logistics consultant for a mid-sized firm in Norfolk. It was a convenient cover, and technically true. I did consult on logistics, just not the kind that involved shipping containers and delivery schedules. My actual job involved coordinating multinational training exercises and advising on strategic supply chain operations for NATO forces. But nobody at these events needed to know that. Marcus spotted me near the silent auction tables and waved me over. He moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who'd learned to navigate the world on his own terms, prosthetic leg and all. We hugged briefly, and he handed me a glass of sparkling water. "Glad you made it," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd have time with your schedule." I smiled. "Wouldn't miss it. How's the fundraising going?" "Better than last year. We might actually hit our goal tonight." He glanced across the room, and his expression tightened slightly. "Your family here?" My stomach dropped. "Just my brother-in-law, Brandon. Vanessa couldn't make it. Work thing." Marcus nodded but didn't say anything. He knew Brandon. Everyone in the local veteran community knew Brandon Hewitt. Not because he supported the cause, but because he showed up to these events like they were networking opportunities, handing out business cards and talking loudly about his company's quarterly earnings while veterans tried to share their stories. He treated the whole thing like a country club mixer. I saw him before he saw me. Brandon stood near the bar, his tailored navy suit probably worth more than most people's monthly rent. He had his phone out, laughing at something on the screen, completely ignoring the older man beside him who was trying to get his attention. The older man wore a faded dress uniform with ribbons I recognized immediately. Korean War Service Medal, Purple Heart, Bronze Star. His name tag read Patterson. Brandon finally glanced up, said something I couldn't hear, and turned his back to the man. Roy Patterson stood there for a moment, looking small and uncertain before shuffling away toward the restrooms. I felt my jaw tighten, but I forced myself to exhale slowly. Not your business, Tara. Not yet. The evening progressed with the usual rhythm of these events: speeches, thank yous, a video montage of veterans the fund had helped over the past year. I sat at a table near the back with Marcus and a few other volunteers. Brandon had positioned himself front and center, right next to the podium where a photographer from the local paper could get a clear shot of him applauding enthusiastically. During the dinner service, I noticed Roy Patterson sitting alone at a table near the kitchen doors. His plate was untouched. He looked exhausted, like someone who'd spent all his energy just getting through the door. I excused myself and walked over. "Mind if I sit?" He looked up surprised, then smiled softly. "Please." We talked for a while. Roy had served in Korea from 1951 to 1953.
He'd been a radio operator, spent months in freezing foxholes relaying coordinates while mortars exploded overhead. After the war, he came home, worked at a textile mill for 40 years, raised 3 kids. His wife passed 2 years ago. He lived alone now, in a small apartment on the east side of town. He'd come tonight because Marcus had personally invited him, told him the community wanted to honor his service. It means something, Roy said quietly, his hands folded on the table. To be remembered, to know it mattered. It did matter, I told him. It still does. He nodded, eyes distant, lost somewhere between here and a mountainside 70 years ago. That's when Brandon's voice cut through the room like a car alarm. He was standing now, tie loosened, face flushed from too much wine. He had his arm around Derek Walsh, his business partner, and they were both laughing at something on Brandon's phone. "I'm telling you," Brandon said loudly, "half the guys at these things are just looking for a handout. Dress up in some old uniform, cry about their service, and boom, free meal and a tax write-off for everybody else." A few people nearby shifted uncomfortably. Marcus, across the room, locked eyes with me. I shook my head slightly. Not yet. But Brandon wasn't done. He pointed toward the stage where a younger veteran, maybe mid-30s, was setting up for a speech. "Look at that guy! Bet he never saw combat. Probably sat in an air-conditioned office in Germany eating schnitzel, and now he wants a medal for it." Derek laughed. "You're terrible, man. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." Roy's hands tightened on the edge of the table. I reached over and gently placed my hand on his. "Ignore him," I said softly. "He doesn't know what he's talking about." Roy's voice was barely a whisper. People like him never do. The speeches began, and for a while, Brandon settled down.
The program director spoke about the success stories from the past year. A young Marine who'd found stable housing after 2 years on the streets. A Vietnam vet who finally got the medical care he needed. A Gold Star family who received scholarships for their kids. The room was quiet, respectful. Then came the moment that changed everything. The director invited Roy Patterson to the stage. She explained that Roy had been a loyal supporter of the fund despite his modest means, donating $20 every month for the past 5 years. Tonight, they wanted to honor him with a Lifetime Service Recognition Award. Roy stood slowly, hands trembling slightly as he made his way toward the stage. The room erupted in applause. People stood. I stood. Marcus stood. Even the waitstaff stopped to clap. Roy climbed the 3 steps carefully, gripping the railing. The director handed him a framed certificate and shook his hand. Roy's eyes were wet. He leaned toward the microphone. "Thank you," he began, voice shaking. "I never expected this. I just wanted to help because I remember what it was like to come home and feel forgotten." That's when Brandon's voice rang out again. "Oh, for God's sake." The applause died. Heads turned. Brandon was still seated, arms crossed, shaking his head in exaggerated disbelief. $20 a month? That's what we're celebrating? I spend more than that on coffee." Derek tried to shush him, but Brandon waved him off. "This whole thing is a joke. We're supposed to be raising serious money here, not patting some old guy on the back for his lunch money donations." The director tried to continue, but Roy had already stepped back from the microphone. His face had gone pale. He looked smaller suddenly, like he was folding in on himself. Brandon stood up, swaying slightly. "You want to make a real difference? Write a check that matters. Don't waste our time with this sentimental garbage." That's when Roy started down the stairs. Maybe he was shaken. Maybe his legs just gave out. I don't know. But he missed the last step and stumbled forward. Brandon was right there at the bottom, phone still in hand, and instead of catching him, instead of stepping aside, he shoved Roy backward. Not hard, not violent, just a dismissive push, the way you'd move a piece of furniture out of your path. Roy fell. He hit the floor with a sickening thud, his head bouncing once against the carpet. The room gasped. Someone screamed. I was already moving. Marcus reached him first, dropping to his knees, checking for a pulse. I knelt on Roy's other side, my hand on his shoulder. His eyes were open but unfocused. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow. "Call an ambulance," I said, my voice sharp and clear. Someone was already dialing. The director rushed over with a first aid kit. Brandon stood frozen, his face shifting from shock to something uglier, annoyance. inconvenience. He tripped, Brandon said defensively. I barely touched him. You pushed him, Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. He was in my way. That was the moment. That single sentence, the room went dead silent. Brandon looked around, suddenly aware that every eye was on him, and for the first time that night, he looked uncertain. I stayed kneeling beside Roy, my hand steady on his shoulder, my mind racing through a dozen different protocols and regulations. I thought about the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Article 134, conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. I thought about the oath I took 17 years ago. I thought about the stripes on my shoulder that nobody in this room had ever seen. And I thought about Roy Patterson, 82 years old, lying on the floor because some corporate executive couldn't be bothered to show basic human decency. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. They stabilized Roy, checked his vitals, loaded him onto a stretcher. He was conscious by then, confused and embarrassed. I held his hand as they wheeled him past. I'm sorry, he whispered. I ruined the event. You didn't ruin anything, I told him. I'll come see you tomorrow. He nodded weakly, and they carried him out into the cold October night.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
When I turned back, Brandon was arguing with the director, insisting it was an accident, demanding she stop making a scene. Vanessa's going to hear about this, Brandon said. She'll tell you the same thing. The old man lost his balance. I'm not responsible for someone else's lack of coordination. That's when I spoke. My voice wasn't loud. I didn't shout, but every person in that ballroom heard me. You're absolutely responsible. Brandon turned, noticing me for the first time. Oh, great. Tara. Look, I know you're into this charity stuff, but let's be realistic here. Accidents happen. That wasn't an accident. You pushed him. He stumbled into me. I saw what happened. So did 50 other people. Brandon's jaw tightened. I don't know what you think you saw, but I'm not going to stand here and be accused of assault by my sister-in-law at a charity event. This is ridiculous. I took a step closer. You put your hands on a veteran. You humiliated him, and then you shoved him to the ground. Brandon laughed, but it was forced, nervous. What are you going to do, Tara? Call the cops? Sue me? Please, you work in logistics. Don't pretend you have any authority here. I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. You're right. I do work in logistics. I pulled my phone from my purse, opened my contacts, and scrolled to a name Brandon wouldn't recognize. Captain Diane Roswell, JAG Corps. I typed a short message while Brandon watched confused. I need to file a formal complaint under Article 134. Incident involves a civilian contractor with prior DoD clearance. We'll forward details within the hour. I hit send. Brandon frowned.
What are you doing? Making a phone call? To who? Your boss? I looked him in the eye. No, to mine. His confusion deepened. What are you talking about? I reached into my purse again and pulled out the one thing I never carried to family events. My military ID. Active duty, current photo, rank clearly printed beneath my name. Lieutenant Colonel Tara Sullivan, United States Army. I held it up so he could see. Brandon stared. His face went through several expressions at once. Confusion, disbelief, then slowly, horribly, realization. You've been pretending to be some corporate consultant this whole time? I haven't been pretending anything. I am a consultant. For NATO, I advise on strategic operations across 4 continents, and as of right now, you're a person of interest in a conduct violation involving a disabled veteran at a DoD-affiliated charity event. That's insane! I'm a civilian! You hold a clearance. You've contracted with the Department of Defense twice in the past 3 years through Morrison and Associates. That makes you subject to certain standards of conduct, especially regarding veteran affairs. Brandon's face had gone white. You can't do this. I already did. Marcus stepped beside me, arms crossed, a grim smile on his face. Told you she wasn't just some office worker. Brandon looked around the room, searching for allies, but everyone had taken a step back. Even Derek had gone silent. The director approached cautiously. Colonel Sullivan, is there anything we should do? Document everything, I said calmly. Witness statements, video footage if the venue has cameras, incident reports. Captain Roswell will be in touch within 24 hours. Understood. I turned back to Brandon. You're going to want to get a lawyer. A good one. This is ridiculous, he sputtered. I'll fight this.
You're blowing this completely out of proportion. An 82-year-old veteran is in the hospital because of you. That's not proportion, that's consequence. I walked past him, collected my coat from the check room, and stepped out into the October cold. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. For 3 years, I'd watched Brandon disrespect service members, mock their sacrifices, treat veterans like props for his own ego. I'd stayed quiet because it wasn't my place, because family dinners were easier without conflict, because Vanessa asked me to let it go. But the moment he put his hands on Roy Patterson, the moment he pushed an elderly man to the ground and laughed about it, he crossed a line that I couldn't ignore, not as a sister-in-law, not as a civilian consultant, as a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. I drove home through empty streets, the city lights blurring past my windows. My phone buzzed, a text from Captain Roswell. "Got your message." I'll pull his clearance file. If what you described is accurate, we have grounds for a full investigation. Stand by. I texted back. Standing by. Another buzz. This time from Vanessa, my sister. Brandon just called me screaming, "What the hell happened tonight?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a simple reply. "I'll explain everything tomorrow. Right now, I need to check on Roy." I didn't wait for her response. I turned off my phone, pulled into my apartment complex, and sat in the car for a while, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Tomorrow, everything would start moving. The investigation, the interviews, the legal proceedings. Brandon would call in favors, hire expensive attorneys, try to spin the story. Vanessa would be caught in the middle. Family dinners would become battlegrounds. But tonight, I just sat in the silence and thought about Roy Patterson, about the way his voice shook when he said, "It means something to be remembered," about the weight of a Bronze Star pinned to a faded uniform, about the cost of service and the price of dignity. And I thought about the ID card still sitting on my passenger seat, the one that said Lieutenant Colonel, the one I'd kept hidden for 3 years because it was easier to be invisible than to be the person everyone expected me to be. I picked it up, traced my thumb over the embossed seal. "Not anymore," I whispered to the empty car. "Not anymore." I woke up the next morning to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My phone had been on silent all night, charging on the kitchen counter while I lay awake staring at the ceiling until almost 4 in the morning. When I finally picked it up and scrolled through the notifications, I could see the panic spreading in real time. Vanessa had called 6 times between midnight and 2. Brandon's name appeared 4 times with increasingly frantic voicemails. Derek Walsh had texted twice asking if we could talk before things got out of hand. Even my mother had sent a message at 7 asking if I was okay and saying she'd heard there was some kind of incident at the gala. I ignored all of them and called Norfolk General Hospital instead. The nurse on duty transferred me to Roy Patterson's room after confirming I was on his approved visitor list. Marcus had apparently added my name late last night. Roy answered on the 3rd ring, his voice hoarse but steady. "Hello? Roy, it's Tara Sullivan from last night. How are you feeling?" There was a pause, then a soft exhale that might have been relief. "Oh, Tara. I'm all right. Little banged up. They're keeping me another day for observation. Mild concussion, some bruising. Could have been worse. I'm so sorry that happened to you." "Not your fault, dear. Some people just don't have respect in them. I wanted to come by this morning if that's okay. Bring you some real food. Not whatever they're serving in there." He chuckled weakly. "That would be nice. Hospital breakfast tastes like cardboard soaked in disappointment. I'll be there in an hour." After I hung up, I finally opened Vanessa's messages. The first few were confused. "What's going on? Brandon said you threatened him?" The middle ones were angry. "You pulled out a military ID and humiliated him in front of everyone? Why would you do that?" The last one, sent at 6 this morning, was different. "Just call me, please." I didn't call. Not yet. Instead, I showered, dressed in jeans and a plain sweater, and stopped at a diner on the way to the hospital. I ordered Roy's breakfast to go. Scrambled eggs, bacon, wheat toast, fresh fruit, and coffee.
Real coffee, not the watered-down version hospitals tried to pass off as drinkable. Norfolk General was a 15-minute drive from my apartment. I parked in the visitor lot and carried the food through the main entrance, past the gift shop and the chapel, up to the 3rd floor where they'd placed Roy in a semi-private room. The other bed was empty. He sat propped up against pillows, the morning light filtering through thin curtains, making him look older and more fragile than he had the night before. When he saw me, his face brightened. You actually came. I told you I would. I set the food on the rolling tray table and pulled a chair close to his bed. He opened the container and smiled at the eggs. You're a saint. Just someone who knows hospital food is a crime against humanity. We ate in comfortable silence for a while. Roy took small bites, chewing slowly, savoring each piece of bacon like it was a delicacy. When he finished, he set the container aside and looked at me with those clear, knowing eyes that had seen too much and understood more than most people ever would. Marcus told me who you are, what you do. I nodded. I figured he might. Why keep it secret? I shrugged. Easier that way. People treat you differently when they know. They either expect you to be some kind of hero or they resent you for it. Sometimes both at once. And your family. They didn't need to know. My sister knows I'm in the service, but she thinks I push papers at a desk job in Maryland. My parents know even less. It's just simpler to let them think I'm boring. Roy smiled faintly. But you're not boring. No, I'm not. That man last night, the one who pushed me, Marcus said he's your brother-in-law. He is. And now you're going after him. It wasn't a question. I leaned back in the chair and crossed my arms. He crossed a line, Roy. What he did to you wasn't just rude or insensitive. It was assault. And because he holds a security clearance through his company's defense contracts, he's subject to the same conduct standards as any other contractor working with the DoD. That means what happened last night isn't just a civilian matter, it's a military one. Roy was quiet for a moment. You don't have to do this for me. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because it's right. He nodded slowly. Your sister's going to be upset. She already is, and your family will take his side. Probably. You're willing to lose all that? I met his gaze. I'm willing to stop pretending it was ever really there. Roy reached over and patted my hand. You're a good person, Tara. Don't let them make you feel guilty for having a spine. I stayed with him for another hour. We talked about everything except last night. He told me stories about Korea, about the buddies he lost and the ones who made it home. He showed me a photo on his phone of his grandkids, twin girls who lived in Arizona and visited twice a year. He talked about his wife, how she used to make the best apple pie in the county, how he still hadn't gotten used to eating dinner alone. When I finally left, he squeezed my hand. Thank you for the breakfast and for everything else. I'll check on you tomorrow. I know you will. I walked back through the hospital corridors feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because Roy was okay, heavier because I knew what came next. My phone rang as I reached my car. Vanessa. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hey. Her voice was strained, exhausted. Tara, we need to talk. I know. Can you come over, please? Brandon's at work and I just need to understand what happened. I hesitated. Vanessa and I had always been close, or at least we used to be. Growing up, she was the responsible one, the planner, the daughter who did everything right. I was the wanderer, the one who joined the army right out of high school instead of going to college like everyone expected. Our paths diverged early, but we always found our way back to each other. Until she married Brandon 3 years ago. After that, things shifted. Family dinners became performances. Conversations became surface-level pleasantries. And I started keeping more and more of my life hidden because it was easier than watching her make excuses for him. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Thank you. Vanessa and Brandon lived in a 2-story colonial in a gated community on the west side of town. Manicured lawns, expensive cars, HOA rules about mailbox colors. I pulled up to their driveway and sat there for a moment, gathering myself. This wasn't going to be easy. Vanessa opened the door before I knocked. She looked tired, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, wearing yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt. She hugged me quickly, then led me inside to the kitchen. Coffee was already brewing. We sat at the island, mugs between us, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Vanessa broke the silence. He said you threatened him, said you pulled out some military ID and told him you were going to ruin his career. That's not exactly what happened. Then tell me what did. So I did. I walked her through the entire evening. Roy's award, Brandon's comments, the push, the fall, the blood on the carpet, my conversation with Captain Roswell, the investigation I had initiated. Vanessa listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each detail. When I finished, she stared into her coffee mug like it held answers she couldn't find. He said the old man tripped. He's lying. Brandon doesn't lie to me.
Yes, he does. You just don't want to see it. Her head snapped up. That's not fair. Isn't it? Vanessa, how many times have you made excuses for him? How many family dinners have you sat through while he belittled veterans, mocked people in uniform, acted like service members were beneath him? He doesn't think that. Then why does he say it? Why does he go to veteran events and treat them like networking opportunities? Why did he shove an 82-year-old man to the ground and laugh about it? Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. He didn't laugh. Yes, he did. I was there. You hate him. You've always hated him. I don't hate him. I just see him clearly. She wiped her eyes angrily. You're going to destroy him. You know that, right? If you go through with this investigation, his clearance gets pulled, his contracts disappear, the company suffers, he loses everything. Good. The word hung between us like a blade. Vanessa stared at me, shocked. Good? That's your answer? He's my husband, Tara. And Roy Patterson is a Korean War veteran who spent last night in the hospital because your husband couldn't be bothered to show basic human decency. This isn't about decency. This is about you finally having an excuse to take him down. You've been waiting for this. I stood up. If you really believe that, then you don't know me at all. Maybe I don't. Maybe I never did. Maybe you've been playing soldier this whole time and pretending to be someone you're not. The accusation stung more than I wanted to admit. I'm not pretending anything. I've been serving my country for 17 years while you've been pretending your husband isn't exactly who he's always shown himself to be. Get out. I walked to the door, then turned back. When this investigation is over, when the truth comes out and you can't deny it anymore, I'll still be your sister. But I won't apologize for doing the right thing. I left before she could respond. The drive home was a blur. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I'd known the conversation would be difficult, but I hadn't expected the depth of her denial, or the accusation that I was somehow the villain in this story. Back at my apartment, I finally opened my laptop and checked my secure email. Captain Roswell had sent a detailed message outlining the next steps. She'd already pulled Brandon's clearance file and found 3 separate complaints filed against him over the past 2 years. None had been pursued because they were considered minor infractions. Inappropriate comments at a defense contractor conference, unprofessional behavior during a site visit to a military installation, a formal reprimand from a base commander after he'd made dismissive remarks about disabled veterans during a procurement meeting. The pattern was clear. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was who Brandon Hewitt was when he thought no one important was watching. Captain Roswell's email continued, I'm recommending a full Article 134 investigation. Given the nature of the incident and his prior complaints, we have sufficient grounds to proceed. I'll need your formal statement by end of business Wednesday. We'll also need witness statements from the event, medical records from Mr. Patterson, and any video footage the venue may have. I'll also need you to prepare for pushback. His legal team will argue civilian jurisdiction, claim this is a personal vendetta, and try to paint you as someone abusing their authority. Make sure your documentation is airtight. I printed the email and began drafting my formal statement. The process was familiar, clinical. Date, time, location, detailed description of events, witnesses present, actions taken. I wrote for 2 hours, cross-referencing my notes from the night before, making sure every detail was accurate and defensible. When I finished, I sent it to Captain Roswell, copied Marcus for his records, and sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Derek Walsh. We need to talk before this gets worse. Brandon's willing to apologize and make this right. Can we meet? I stared at the message, then deleted it without responding. Another buzz, this time from my mother. Vanessa called me crying. She said you're trying to destroy Brandon's career over an accident. This isn't like you, honey. Please call me.
I set the phone face down on the desk and closed my eyes. This was just the beginning. The real fight hadn't even started yet. But I'd known that the moment I pulled out my ID card. I'd known the cost, the fallout, the accusations. I'd known my family would turn against me, that Vanessa would feel betrayed, that my mother would try to smooth things over and make me the problem. I'd known all of it. And I'd done it anyway. Because some things matter more than family dinners and holiday photos and keeping the peace. Some things matter more than being liked or understood or forgiven. Roy Patterson mattered. His service mattered. His dignity mattered. And I was done pretending otherwise. That evening, I went for a run. The air was cold and sharp, biting at my lungs, but I welcomed it. I ran through my neighborhood, past the coffee shop where I usually stopped on Saturday mornings, past the park where kids played on swings, past the convenience store that sold the best breakfast sandwiches in town. I ran until my legs burned and my chest ached and my mind finally went quiet. When I got back, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I showered, made dinner, and sat on my couch with a glass of water and my laptop. I pulled up the files Captain Roswell had sent and began reviewing Brandon's clearance history. Morrison and Associates, his company, held multiple contracts with the Department of Defense. Logistics support for overseas installations, supply chain consulting for NATO operations, equipment procurement advisory services. All of it required top-secret clearance, which meant Brandon had undergone extensive background checks, signed agreements regarding conduct and ethics, and was subject to ongoing review. What he'd done at the gala wasn't just morally wrong, it was a violation of the standards he'd agreed to uphold. And because Roy Patterson was a disabled veteran, the incident fell under specific protections outlined in military conduct codes. Captain Roswell had a note at the bottom of the file. This case is strong. His prior complaints establish a pattern. The medical records support assault. The witness statements are consistent. If he fights this, he'll lose. The question is whether he's smart enough to realize that before we get to a hearing. I closed the laptop and leaned back against the couch cushions.
My phone sat on the coffee table, still face down, still buzzing occasionally with messages I wasn't ready to read. Tomorrow, I'd go back to work. I'd sit in meetings and review logistics reports and pretend everything was normal. But underneath it all, the investigation would be moving forward. Interviews would be conducted. Evidence would be gathered. And slowly, inevitably, the truth would come out. Brandon could hire the best lawyers money could buy. He could spin the story, play the victim, accuse me of abusing my authority. But the facts were the facts, and the facts didn't care about his reputation or his career or his marriage. I thought about Vanessa, about the tears in her eyes, about the way she'd looked at me like I was a stranger. I thought about my mother, who would spend the next few weeks trying to mediate and convince me to drop the whole thing for the sake of family unity. I thought about the cousins and aunts and uncles who would hear Brandon's version first and decide I was the problem. And I thought about Roy Patterson, lying in a hospital bed, apologizing for ruining the event. The choice was easy. I picked up my phone, opened my messages, and typed a response to Captain Roswell. Statement sent. Ready to proceed. Let me know what else you need. Her response came within minutes. Copy that, Colonel. Let's bring this home. I set the phone down and stared out the window at the darkening sky. Somewhere across town, Brandon was probably on the phone with his lawyers, crafting a defense, preparing for war. Somewhere else, Vanessa was probably still crying, caught between her sister and her husband, unable to see that the choice had never been hers to make. And here I was, alone in my apartment, wearing an old army t-shirt and sweatpants, holding the line the only way I knew how. By telling the truth. By refusing to look away. By remembering that some fights are worth losing everything for. The moon rose over Norfolk, pale and cold, and I sat in the darkness waiting for morning. The investigation moved faster than I expected. By Wednesday afternoon, Captain Roswell had already conducted interviews with 7 witnesses from the gala, obtained security footage from the venue's entrance cameras, and secured a written statement from Roy Patterson. She called me on my lunch break, her voice clipped and professional. "We have enough to move forward.
His legal team reached out this morning trying to negotiate a settlement. They want this to disappear quietly. What'd you tell him? That we don't negotiate on matters of veteran welfare and military conduct standards. If Mr. Hewitt wants to make this right, he can cooperate fully with the investigation and accept whatever consequences the review board determines appropriate. There was a pause on her end, the sound of papers shuffling. His attorney claims you have a personal vendetta. They're preparing a motion to have you removed from any involvement in the case on grounds of bias. Expected. What's your response? That your personal relationship to the subject doesn't negate the validity of the complaint or the evidence supporting it. You witnessed the incident. You're a material witness, and your rank and position make you obligated to report conduct violations when you observe them. This isn't personal, it's procedural. Good. There's something else. Morrison and Associates sent a formal letter to the base commander requesting that the investigation be dropped. They're claiming it will damage their ability to fulfill current contracts and jeopardize national security interests. I felt my jaw tighten. That's absurd. It's also desperate. When contractors start throwing around national security claims to protect one employee, it means they know they're in trouble. Captain Roswell's tone shifted slightly, becoming less formal. How are you holding up? I'm fine. Your family giving you hell? Something like that. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. Not everyone would have had the courage to follow through. I appreciate that. We'll be in touch. Hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from Friday. Be ready. After we hung up, I sat in my car in the parking lot of a sandwich shop, staring at the half-eaten turkey club on the passenger seat. My appetite had disappeared. I felt hollowed out, running on caffeine and stubbornness and the kind of anger that burned cold instead of hot. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my mother. Your father and I want to have dinner this weekend, all of us. We need to talk about this situation before it tears the family apart. Please come. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove back to the office and buried myself in work. Spreadsheets, logistics reports, coordination schedules for an upcoming NATO exercise in Poland. The familiar rhythm of data and details helped quiet the noise in my head. Around 4, my desk phone rang. Internal call. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Sullivan. Colonel, this is Lieutenant Ramirez from Public Affairs. We've had 3 media inquiries today about an ongoing investigation involving a civilian contractor and an incident at a veterans charity event. Are you aware of this? My stomach dropped. Yes. Do you want to provide a statement? No. Refer all inquiries to Captain Roswell and GAG. This is an active investigation, and I'm not authorized to comment. Understood. Just wanted to give you a heads up. One of the reporters mentioned your name specifically. Which outlet? Norfolk Tribune. They're running a story tomorrow about tensions between military personnel and defense contractors. Your situation is apparently part of it. I closed my eyes. Of course it was. Brandon's people were already working the PR angle, trying to control the narrative before the facts came out. Thank you for the warning, Lieutenant. Yes, ma'am. I hung up and immediately called Captain Roswell back. She answered on the first ring. I heard. Don't worry, I've already drafted a response for the Tribune. Factual, minimal detail, emphasis on due process. They can't print anything that compromises the investigation. What about my name? Already protected under privacy protocols. They can mention that a complaint was filed by a senior officer, but they can't identify you without risking legal action. Brandon's team is going to leak it anyway. Probably. But when they do, they'll be in violation of DoD information security guidelines, which gives us additional grounds for sanctions.
Let them dig their own grave. I wanted to feel relieved, but all I felt was tired. This whole thing was spiraling into something bigger than I'd anticipated. What started as a simple conduct violation was becoming a public spectacle, and I knew from experience that once the media got involved, the truth often got buried under sensational headlines and carefully crafted spin. That evening, I went to visit Roy again. He'd been discharged from the hospital that morning and was staying temporarily with Marcus while his apartment was being checked for safety modifications. Marcus lived in a small ranch-style house on the east side of town, with a ramp he'd built himself leading up to the front door and a flagpole in the yard flying both the American flag and the POW MIA banner. Marcus let me in and pointed toward the living room. He's in there watching Jeopardy and yelling at the contestants, same as always. Roy sat in a recliner with a blanket over his lap, a cup of tea on the side table, and the remote in his hand. When he saw me, he muted the television. "Tara, didn't expect to see you today. Just wanted to check in. How are you feeling?" "Better. Marcus has been taking good care of me. Too good, actually. He won't let me do anything." From the kitchen, Marcus called out, "That's because you tried to vacuum yesterday and nearly passed out." Roy waved a dismissive hand. I got a little dizzy. Big deal. I pulled up a chair and sat beside him. "The hearing is in 2 weeks?" He nodded slowly. "Marcus told me. Said I might have to testify. Only if you're comfortable with it. Captain Roswell said your written statement might be sufficient." "I'll testify. That man needs to answer for what he did, and not just to me. I saw how he talked to other veterans that night, like we were props for his ego." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Thank you." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the muted television flickering with colorful game show graphics. Finally, Roy spoke again. "Your family still giving you trouble?" "Yeah, they'll come around eventually. Or they won't. Either way, you'll be fine." "You sound pretty sure about that." "I am. You remind me of my daughter. She's a lawyer in Seattle. Spent her whole career standing up for people who couldn't afford to defend themselves. Her mother used to worry she'd burn out, that she'd give too much and have nothing left. But that's not how it works. The more you give to things that matter, the more you have." I felt my throat tighten. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded. Roy picked up the remote and unmuted the television. Final Jeopardy was starting. We watched together, and when the answer was revealed, Roy shook his head. "Who is Abraham Lincoln? Any idiot knows that." I smiled. "Apparently not that idiot." Marcus brought out dinner a little while later. Homemade chili, cornbread, salad. We ate together at the small dining table, talking about everything except the investigation. Marcus told stories about his time in Afghanistan, the translator who saved his unit during an ambush, the dog they adopted at the base who wouldn't leave his side after the explosion. Roy talked about his grandkids, how they were both in college now studying environmental science, how proud he was, even though he didn't fully understand what they were learning. It felt normal, easy, like family dinners used to feel before everything got complicated. I stayed until almost 9, then hugged them both and drove home through quiet streets. When I got back to my apartment, I found an envelope taped to my door. No postage, no return address, just my name written in neat block letters. I took it inside and opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "You're making a mistake. Drop the investigation and we can all move on. Keep pushing and you'll regret it. This is your only warning." No signature. No identifying information, but I didn't need a signature to know who it came from. I took a photo of the letter, forwarded it to Captain Roswell with a brief explanation, and then filed it in a folder I'd started keeping for documentation. Threats, intimidation tactics, attempts at coercion, all of it would be useful if this went to a formal hearing. My phone rang almost immediately. "Captain Roswell." "Got your email. You okay?" "I'm fine. It's not the first threatening letter I've received. Still, this escalates things. I'm going to recommend you vary your routine for the next few weeks. Different routes to work, different times. Be aware of your surroundings." "You think he'd actually try something?" "I think desperate people do stupid things. And right now, Brandon Hewitt is very desperate." "Noted." "There's something else. Morrison and Associates fired him this afternoon." I sat down slowly. "What?" "They terminated his employment effective immediately. Apparently, the board decided he was too much of a liability. The contracts are worth more than one employee, even a senior partner." "So he has nothing to lose now?" "Exactly, which makes him more dangerous, not less.
Be careful, Tara. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room, the threatening letter still on the table in front of me. Brandon had just lost his career, his reputation, and his income, and he blamed me for all of it. Vanessa called an hour later. Her voice was raw, barely holding together. He's been fired. Did you know? I just found out. This is what you wanted, isn't it? You wanted him to ruin. I wanted him to face consequences for his actions. There's a difference. He's destroyed. His career is over. The company he built is cutting ties with him. Our mortgage, our life, everything we planned. It's all gone. He did this to himself. You did this. You could have let it go. You could have accepted his apology and moved on. But you had to make it a federal case. Literally, he pushed a veteran to the ground and showed no remorse. What did you expect me to do? I expected you to remember he's family. I expected loyalty. Loyalty doesn't mean protecting people from their own actions. Vanessa's voice broke completely. I can't do this anymore. I can't be in the middle. If you go through with this hearing, if you testify against him, then we're done. You and me, I can't have a sister who's trying to destroy my husband. The words hit like a physical blow, but I kept my voice steady. I'm sorry you feel that way. That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say, Vanessa? That I'll drop the investigation? That I'll pretend none of this happened? I can't do that. Then I guess we have nothing left to talk about. She hung up. I sat there, holding the phone, staring at the screen until it went dark. My sister, the person I'd grown up with, shared a room with, told secrets to. The person who used to defend me when kids at school made fun of my decision to join the military. The person who cried at my commissioning ceremony and told me she was proud of me. Gone. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. I just felt numb, like I was watching my life fall apart from a distance, detached and clinical. My mother called next. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Tara, Vanessa just called me. She said you two had a fight. We did. She said you chose this investigation over your family. I chose doing the right thing. If that costs me my family, then that's the price. My mother's voice was gentle, pleading.
Honey, I know you think you're helping, but sometimes the greater good means protecting the people we love. Brandon made a mistake. He's paying for it. Can't that be enough? No. Why not? Because it's not about punishment. It's about accountability. It's about making sure people in positions of power and privilege understand that they can't treat veterans like garbage without consequences. But at what cost? Your sister is devastated. Your father and I are caught in the middle. Family gatherings are going to be impossible. Then don't invite me. The silence on the other end was heavy, suffocating. Finally, my mother spoke again, her voice colder than I'd ever heard it. I raised you better than this. I raised you to value family above everything else. You raised me to do the right thing, even when it's hard. That's what I'm doing. I don't think I know you anymore. Maybe you never did. I hung up before she could respond. The apartment felt too small suddenly, too quiet. I grabbed my keys and went for a drive. No destination in mind, just movement. I drove through the city, past the neighborhoods where I'd grown up, past my old high school, past the recruiting office where I'd signed my enlistment papers at 18. I ended up at the waterfront, parked near the naval base, watching ships move slowly across the dark water. The lights from the base reflected on the surface, distorted and wavering. I rolled down the window and let the cold air rush in, sharp and clean. This was the cost. This was what happened when you refused to compromise on principles. You lost people. You lost comfort. You lost the easy path. But you kept your integrity. I thought about the oath I'd taken.
I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God. Nowhere in that oath did it say anything about protecting family members who broke the rules. Nowhere did it say loyalty to blood came before loyalty to principles. I'd made my choice 17 years ago when I raised my right hand. Everything after that was just following through. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Just heard about Brandon getting fired. You doing okay? I typed back. I've been better, but I'm not backing down. His response came immediately. Good. Neither are we. Roy wants you to know he's ready to testify whenever they need him. I smiled despite everything. Tell him thank you. The hearing was scheduled for the following Friday at 0900 hours at Joint Base Langley. Captain Roswell sent me a detailed preparation brief outlining the format, the panel members, and the expected line of questioning. Brandon's legal team had submitted a list of character witnesses who would speak on his behalf. His pastor, his business partner Derek, 2 clients from Morrison and Associates, and surprisingly, my own father. That last name on the list felt like a punch to the gut. My own father was going to testify in defense of the man I was accusing. He was going to stand in front of a military panel and vouch for Brandon's character, his integrity, his service to the community. I called Captain Roswell immediately. Did you see the witness list? I did. My father is testifying for him. I know. I'm sorry, Tara, but it doesn't change the facts of the case. Character witnesses can speak to general reputation, but they can't contradict the evidence. The medical records, the video footage, the eyewitness statements, those stand on their own. It's still going to be hard to watch. I know, but you're stronger than you think. And you're not alone. Marcus and I will be there. Roy will be there. You have people in your corner. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with my preparation notes spread out in front of me. I reviewed my statement for the 10th time, making sure every word was precise, every detail documented. I knew Brandon's lawyers would try to discredit me, paint me as vindictive or biased or power-hungry. I needed to be unshakable. The days leading up to the hearing crawled by. I went to work, did my job, came home, and prepared. I stopped checking my personal phone. I stopped responding to messages from family members asking me to reconsider. I stopped hoping that someone, anyone, would understand why this mattered so much. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios in my head. What if the panel sided with Brandon? What if they decided my personal connection to him compromised the case? What if they saw this whole thing as a family dispute that got out of hand? At 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and made coffee. I sat on my small balcony in the cold pre-dawn darkness and watched the city slowly wake up. Lights flickered on in distant windows. Cars began moving on the streets below. The world kept turning, indifferent to my crisis. By the time the sun rose, I'd made peace with whatever was coming. I'd told the truth. I'd followed procedure. I'd done everything right. And if that wasn't enough, then at least I'd know I'd tried. I showered, dressed in my service uniform, and checked my appearance in the mirror. Press sharp, ribbons aligned, hair regulation perfect. I looked like what I was, a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. Not someone's sister, not someone's daughter. A soldier. I grabbed my cover and my briefcase and walked out into the cold November morning, ready for whatever came next. Joint Base Langley sat on the edge of the peninsula, sprawling and functional, a maze of administrative buildings and training facilities surrounded by chain-link fencing and security checkpoints. I arrived 40 minutes early, showed my credentials at the gate, and parked in the visitor lot near the JAG building. The sky was overcast, threatening rain, and the wind carried the smell of salt water and jet fuel. Captain Roswell met me at the entrance. She wore her service uniform with the same precision I did, her expression calm and focused. We shook hands briefly. Ready? As I'll ever be. The hearing room was smaller than I expected. No grand courtroom with high ceilings and dramatic lighting, just a rectangular space with fluorescent bulbs, a long table at the front for the panel members, a witness chair to the side, and 2 tables facing forward for the parties involved. 1 table for the prosecution, where Captain Roswell and I would sit.
1 for the defense, where Brandon and his attorneys would be. I took my seat and arranged my materials. Statement, supporting documents, timeline of events, medical records from Roy's hospital stay. Everything organized in labeled folders. Everything accessible within seconds, if needed. The door opened, and Brandon walked in, flanked by 2 attorneys. One was a man in his 50s with silver hair and an expensive suit. The other was a younger woman, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Brandon wore a dark suit, white shirt, conservative tie. He looked thinner than I remembered, his face drawn and pale. When his eyes met mine, there was no recognition, no acknowledgement, just cold hostility. His attorneys took their seats and began arranging their own materials. The older attorney leaned over and whispered something to Brandon, who nodded without taking his eyes off me. The panel members entered to a side door. 3 officers, a brigadier general serving as the presiding officer, a colonel from the Judge Advocate General's Corps, and a lieutenant colonel from the Inspector General's office. They took their seats at the front table, and the room fell silent. The brigadier general, a woman named Hayes with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, opened a folder and scanned the first page. This hearing is convened under Article 134 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice to review allegations of conduct unbecoming against Brandon Michael Hewitt, civilian contractor with DoD security clearance. The complainant is Lieutenant Colonel Tara Sullivan, United States Army. Mr. Hewitt, you have the right to legal representation, which I see you've exercised. Do you understand the nature of these proceedings? Brandon's lead attorney stood. Yes, General Hayes. My client understands and is prepared to defend himself against these baseless accusations. Captain Roswell stood as well. The government is ready to proceed, ma'am. Very well. Captain Roswell, you may begin. Captain Roswell walked to the center of the room, her movements precise and deliberate. She outlined the events of October 23rd, the Veterans Relief Fund Gala, the incident involving Roy Patterson, and the subsequent complaint filed by me. She spoke clearly and methodically, presenting the facts without embellishment or emotion. The evidence will show that Mr. Hewitt engaged in conduct that violated the standards of behavior expected of individuals holding DoD security clearance. Specifically, he assaulted a disabled veteran in a public setting, demonstrated a pattern of disrespect towards service members, and showed no remorse for his actions. The government will present witness testimony, medical records, video evidence, and documentation of prior complaints against Mr. Hewitt. She returned to her seat, and the defense attorney stood immediately. General Hayes, the defense will demonstrate that this entire proceeding is motivated by personal animus between Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan and my client. Mr. Hewitt is married to the Lieutenant Colonel's sister, and their relationship has been contentious for years. What happened at the gala was an unfortunate accident blown out of proportion by someone with a grudge and the power to weaponize military regulations. I kept my expression neutral, but I felt Captain Roswell's hand briefly touch my arm under the cable, a silent reminder to stay calm. General Hayes made a note on her pad. Both sides will have the opportunity to present their case. We'll begin with witness testimony. Captain Roswell, call your first witness. The government calls Marcus Greene. Marcus entered from the hallway, walking with a slight hitch in his gait from his prosthetic leg. He was sworn in and took the witness chair. Captain Roswell approached. Mr. Greene, please state your relationship to the events of October 23rd. I'm the founder and director of the Veterans Relief Fund. The gala was our annual fundraiser. I invited both Roy Patterson and Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan as guests. Were you present when the incident occurred? Yes, ma'am. I was approximately 15 feet away when Mr. Hewitt pushed Mr. Patterson. The defense attorney shot to his feet. Objection! The witness is characterizing the action before establishing what he actually observed. General Hayes nodded. Sustained. Mr. Greene, describe what you saw without interpretation. Marcus took a breath. I saw Mr. Patterson descending the stairs from the stage. He missed the last step and stumbled forward. Mr. Hewitt was standing at the bottom of the stairs. Instead of catching Mr. Patterson or stepping aside, Mr. Hewitt extended his hands and made contact with Mr. Patterson's chest, causing him to fall backward onto the floor. What happened immediately after? Mr. Patterson struck his head on the carpet. There was blood. I ran over to check his vitals while Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan called for an ambulance. Mr. Hewitt stood there looking annoyed. He said something like, he tripped, or he was in my way. I don't remember the exact words, but the tone was dismissive. Did Mr. Hewitt offer assistance or express concern? No, ma'am. He walked back to his table and continued his conversation with his associate like nothing had happened. The defense attorney stood for cross-examination. Mr. Greene, you're friends with Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan, correct? Yes. And you are aware of tension between her and my client prior to this event? I knew they didn't get along. Most people who meet Mr. Hewitt don't get along with him. A few people in the gallery suppressed smiles. General Hayes gave Marcus a warning look. Please answer the questions directly, Mr. Greene. Yes, ma'am. I was aware of some tension. The attorney pressed on. Isn't it possible that your friendship with Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan has influenced your perception of what happened that night? No, I saw what I saw, and so did 50 other people in that room. No further questions. Marcus stepped down and Roy Patterson was called next. He walked slowly to the witness chair, his movements careful and deliberate. When he was sworn in, his hand shook slightly holding the card, but his voice was steady. Captain Roswell approached gently. Mr. Patterson, can you describe your experience at the gala? Roy took a breath. I was honored with an award that night. It was one of the proudest moments of my life. After I accepted it, I started down the stairs. I was being careful because my knees aren't what they used to be. I missed the last step and started to fall forward. The next thing I knew, someone pushed me and I was on the ground. Did you see who pushed you? Roy looked directly at Brandon. Yes, that man right there. The defense attorney stood quickly. Mr. Patterson, you suffered a concussion that night, correct? Yes. And immediately after the fall, you were disoriented and confused? I was hurt, but I knew what happened. But you can't say with absolute certainty that my client intentionally pushed you as opposed to accidentally making contact while trying to help you, can you? Roy's voice hardened. I know the difference between someone trying to help and someone shoving me out of their way. He pushed me. The attorney shifted tactics. Mr. Patterson, how old are you? 82? And you have mobility issues, balance problems. Some days are better than others. So, isn't it possible you simply lost your balance and my client's contact was incidental? Roy stared at the attorney with the kind of quiet dignity that comes from surviving things most people can't imagine. Young man, I carried a radio through the mountains of Korea in the winter of 1952. I hiked 20 miles in blizzards with equipment on my back. I know when I've lost my balance, and I know when I've been pushed. Your client pushed me. And then he laughed about it. The attorney sat down without another word. General Hayes looked at her notes. Captain Roswell, do you have additional witnesses? Yes, ma'am. The government calls Lieutenant Colonel Tara Sullivan. I stood and walked to the witness chair, my legs steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I was sworn in and took my seat, meeting General Hayes's eyes directly. Captain Roswell began. Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan, please describe your presence at the gala on October 23rd. I was there as a guest of Mr. Greene. I've supported the Veterans Relief Fund for several years through donations and volunteer work. That night, I was seated near the back of the ballroom. Were you present when Roy Patterson received his award? Yes, ma'am. And when the incident occurred? Yes. I had a clear line of sight to the stage and the stairs. Describe what you observed. I saw Mr. Patterson descending the stairs carefully. He stumbled on the last step. Mr. Hewitt was standing at the bottom. Mr. Patterson fell forward slightly, and Mr. Hewitt placed both hands on Mr. Patterson's chest and pushed him backward. Mr. Patterson fell and struck his head on the floor. I immediately went to his aid and called emergency services.
Did you hear Mr. Hewitt make any statements? Yes. He said the old man was in his way and that he barely touched him. He also made several disparaging comments earlier in the evening about veterans in attendance, referring to them as freeloaders and suggesting they were exploiting their service for personal gain. Captain Roswell pulled out a document. I'm entering into evidence Exhibit F, a recording of comments made by Mr. Hewitt during the dinner service, captured by another attendee's phone. She played the audio. Brandon's voice came through the speakers, slightly muffled but unmistakable. I'm telling you, half these guys are just looking for a handout, dress up in some old uniform, cry about their service, and boom, free meal. The room was silent. Brandon stared at the table, his jaw clenched. Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan, what did you do after the incident? I remained with Mr. Patterson until the paramedics arrived. Later that evening, I contacted Captain Roswell to file a formal complaint under Article 134. Why did you choose to file a military complaint rather than pursue civilian charges? Because Mr. Hewitt holds a DoD security clearance and has contracted with military installations, his conduct toward a veteran, particularly a disabled veteran, falls under military standards of behavior for cleared personnel. It wasn't personal. It was procedural. The defense attorney stood for cross-examination. He was older, more experienced, and I could see him calculating his approach. Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan, you're married to Mr. Hewitt's wife's sister. Sorry, Mr. Hewitt is married to your sister, correct? Yes. And you've had a difficult relationship with him for years? We've had differences. Differences. That's one way to put it. Isn't it true that you've openly criticized his business practices and his views on military spending? I've disagreed with some of his positions, yes. And isn't it true that you've been waiting for an opportunity to use your military authority against him? No, that's not true. Really, because it seems awfully convenient that the moment something happens involving Mr. Hewitt, you immediately escalate it to a military matter rather than handling it through civilian channels like a normal family dispute. I kept my voice level. This isn't a family dispute. A veteran was assaulted at a charity event. As a senior officer and a witness to the incident, I had a duty to report it. That's what I did. Or you saw a chance to ruin your brother-in-law's career and you took it. Captain Roswell stood. Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness and speculating about motive without foundation. General Hayes nodded. Sustained. Move on, counselor. The attorney changed direction. Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan, how many times have you filed complaints under Article 134? This is the first time. So you're not experienced with this process. I'm experienced with following regulations and reporting violations when I observe them. But you chose to involve the military rather than simply encouraging Mr. Patterson to file a civil suit. Why? Because the military has standards for cleared personnel. Mr. Hewitt violated those standards. A civil suit wouldn't address that. Or you wanted to use your rank to intimidate him. I wanted to ensure accountability. The attorney paused, consulting his notes. Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan, at the gala, you identified yourself using your military credentials. Why? Because Mr. Hewitt questioned my authority and I clarified who I was. You pulled rank. I provided accurate information. In front of dozens of people, at a civilian event. Doesn't that strike you as inappropriate? No. What's inappropriate is assaulting a veteran and then dismissing it as inconsequential. The attorney sat down, clearly frustrated. No further questions. General Hayes looked at both sides. Any additional witnesses?
Brandon's attorney stood. The defense calls Everett Sullivan. My father walked into the room, and I felt something break inside my chest. He wouldn't look at me as he was sworn in. He took the witness chair and folded his hands in his lap. The defense attorney approached. Mr. Sullivan, you're Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan's father, correct? Yes. And Brandon Hewitt is your son-in-law? Yes. Married to my daughter Vanessa for 3 years. Can you speak to his character? My father finally looked up, but not at me, at the panel. Brandon is a good man. He's built a successful business. He's been generous to our family, and he supported Vanessa through some difficult times. He can be opinionated, and he doesn't always express himself in the most tactful way. But he's not violent. He's not cruel. Were you aware of tension between your daughter, Tara, and Brandon? Yes. Tara has always been very rigid in her thinking. She sees things in black and white. Brandon is more nuanced. They've clashed over political views, military policy, business ethics. It's been a source of stress for the whole family. In your opinion, could that tension have influenced Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan's decision to file this complaint? My father nodded slowly. I think Tara saw an opportunity to act on years of resentment. I think she used her position to punish him for not sharing her worldview. And I think it's tearing our family apart. The words landed like artillery shells. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table, my expression neutral, but inside I was shattered. Captain Roswell stood for cross-examination. Mr. Sullivan, were you present at the gala on October 23rd? No. So you didn't witness the incident involving Roy Patterson? No. And you're not familiar with the evidence in this case, the medical records, the witness statements, the video footage. I know my daughter, and I know she's capable of holding grudges. Captain Roswell's voice sharpened. Mr. Sullivan, with all due respect, your personal opinion of your daughter's character is not evidence. The facts of this case are clear and documented. Do you have any first-hand knowledge that contradicts the evidence presented today? My father hesitated. No. No further questions. He stepped down and walked past me without a glance. I watched him leave the room and felt the last thread connecting me to my family snap clean. General Hayes called a brief recess. Captain Roswell and I stepped into the hallway. She put a hand on my shoulder. That was brutal. I'm sorry. It's fine. It's not fine. But you held up. That's what matters. We went back inside and the panel reconvened. Both sides gave closing arguments. Brandon's attorney painted me as vindictive and power-hungry, someone who weaponized military regulations to settle personal scores. Captain Roswell methodically walked through the evidence, the pattern of behavior, the medical documentation, the witness testimony. When both sides rested, General Hayes conferred briefly with the other panel members. Then she addressed the room. This panel will take the evidence under advisement. We will issue a written decision within 10 business days. Mr. Hewitt, you are ordered to remain available for further questioning if needed. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down, and it was over. I gathered my materials and walked out into the cold November afternoon. The rain had started, light and steady. Marcus and Roy were waiting by the entrance. Marcus pulled me into a brief hug. You did good. Roy squeezed my hand. Thank you for standing up. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We walked to the parking lot together, and I sat in my car for a long time, watching the rain stream down the windshield, blurring everything into soft gray shapes. My phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. I heard what happened. Dad told me what he said. I just want you to know I didn't ask him to do that. I stared at the message, then deleted it without responding. Another text, this time from my mother. We need to talk, please. I turned off my phone and drove home through the rain, the city passing by in wet smears of light and color. When I finally pulled into my parking space, I sat there until the engine cooled and the rain eased to a drizzle. 10 days. That's how long I had to wait for the panel's decision. 10 days to wonder if I'd done the right thing. 10 days to live with the cost. The 10 days passed like slow torture. I went to work, attended meetings, reviewed reports, and pretended everything was normal while my entire life hung in suspension. Captain Roswell called twice to check in, reminding me that panel decisions took time, that thorough review was a good sign, that I should try to stay busy and not obsess over outcomes I couldn't control. I ignored her advice and obsessed anyway. On day 6, I received an email from Morrison & Associates' legal department. They were terminating all contracts associated with Brandon Hewitt and conducting an internal review of their screening procedures for personnel with security clearances. The email was cold and corporate, carefully worded to protect the company from liability while distancing themselves from Brandon as quickly as possible. They copied Captain Roswell, the Inspector General's office, and, somehow, my personal email address. I assumed Brandon's attorneys had provided it during discovery. On day 8, my sister called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again an hour later, then again that evening.
Finally, she sent a text. "I'm filing for divorce. I thought you should know." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt sick. Vanessa and Brandon's marriage ending wasn't what I'd wanted. I'd wanted accountability, consequences, justice for Roy. But now that it was happening, now that the collateral damage was spreading outward in waves, I couldn't feel good about any of it. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on something simple. "I'm sorry it came to this." Her reply came immediately. "Are you, though?" I set the phone down and didn't answer. On day 9, I visited Roy at Marcus's house. He was doing physical therapy exercises in the living room, slowly stretching and moving with the careful deliberation of someone learning to trust his body again after trauma. When he saw me, he smiled and waved me over. "How are you holding up?" I shrugged.
One more day. You'll get through it. Whatever they decide, you did the right thing. I sat on the couch and watched him work through his exercises. Marcus brought out coffee and we sat together in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from shared understanding. These men, both veterans, both survivors, both intimately familiar with the cost of standing for something, they didn't need me to explain. They just knew. Roy finished his exercises and sat in his recliner, breathing slightly hard. Marcus brought out coffee, and we sat together in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from shared understanding. These men, both veterans, both survivors, both intimately familiar with the cost of standing for something, they didn't need me to explain. They just knew. Roy finished his exercises and sat in his recliner, breathing slightly hard. Marcus told me something interesting yesterday. Yeah? He said you've been helping fund the Veterans Relief Fund for years. Anonymously. Substantial donations every quarter. I shifted uncomfortably. It's not a big deal. It is to us. To the families we've helped house. To the vets we've gotten into treatment programs. You've been doing that while keeping your rank secret, while letting people think you were just some office worker with a regular paycheck. It was easier that way. Less attention. Roy smiled knowingly. You remind me of the best officers I served under. The ones who led from the front, but never needed the spotlight. The ones who cared more about the mission than the medal. I felt my throat tighten. Thank you. We talked until late afternoon, the conversation drifting from topic to topic. Roy told me more about his grandkids, how they were planning to visit for Thanksgiving. Marcus talked about expanding the fund's services, maybe partnering with local colleges to offer vocational training. Normal things. Future things. It felt good to think beyond the hearing, beyond the waiting, beyond the uncertainty. When I left, Roy hugged me at the door. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've got a family here. Remember that. I drove home thinking about that word, family. The people you're born to versus the people you choose. The obligations of blood versus the bonds of shared values. I'd lost one kind of family over the past few weeks, but maybe I'd found another. Day 10 arrived cold and bright. I woke at 5, unable to sleep, and went for a run through the empty pre-dawn streets. My breath came in visible clouds and my muscles burned, but the physical exertion helped quiet the noise in my head. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sun was rising and my phone was buzzing with a new email. Tapton Roswell. Subject line, panel decision. My hands shook as I opened it. Tara, the panel's decision came through this morning. Call me when you get this. I called immediately. She answered on the first ring. Good morning. Tell me. The panel ruled in our favor. Brandon Hewitt's security clearance is permanently revoked. He's barred from holding any position requiring DoD clearance for a minimum of 10 years. Additionally, the panel recommended that JAG forward the case to civilian authorities for potential criminal assault charges. I sat down slowly on my couch, the phone pressed to my ear. What does that mean for him? It means his career in defense contracting is over. It means he'll likely face criminal charges in civilian court. And it means the military has officially recognized that what he did was wrong, that his conduct violated the standards we hold for anyone working with or around service members. What about the personal vendetta argument, the family conflict? The panel addressed it directly in their findings. They acknowledged your relationship but concluded that the evidence stood independent of any personal motivation. The witness testimony, the medical records, the video footage, the pattern of prior complaints. It was overwhelming.
Your relationship to him didn't change the facts. I exhaled slowly. Thank you for everything. You did this, Tara. You stood up when it mattered. You took the heat and you didn't back down. That takes real courage. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet morning light and let the reality sink in. It was over. The investigation, the hearing, the waiting. Brandon would face consequences. Roy would have validation, and I could finally stop holding my breath. My phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan? This is Emily Chen from the Norfolk Tribune. I'm working on a follow-up story about the hearing. Do you have time for a few questions? I'm not authorized to comment on active cases. I understand, but the panel's decision is now public record. I'd like to give you an opportunity to share your perspective. There's been a lot of speculation about your motives, and I think readers deserve to hear your side. I hesitated. Captain Roswell had warned me about media engagement, about how reporters could twist words and create narratives that served their story rather than the truth. But she'd also said that silence sometimes allowed the wrong story to become the accepted version. What kind of questions? Just basic background. Why you filed the complaint, what you hope to achieve, how you respond to claims that this was personal rather than professional. I'll give you 5 minutes, but I'm speaking as a private citizen, not as a representative of the military. Clear? Crystal clear. I took a breath and began. What happened at the gala wasn't about me or my relationship with Brandon Hewitt. It was about an 82-year-old veteran being assaulted and humiliated at an event meant to honor him. It was about someone in a position of privilege showing complete disregard for the people who've sacrificed everything for this country. I filed the complaint because I had a duty to report it, not as his sister-in-law, as a senior officer who witnessed a violation of conduct standards. And the allegations that this was motivated by personal conflict? Evidence doesn't care about personal relationships. The medical records showing Roy Patterson's injuries are real. The witness statements from multiple attendees are consistent. The video footage speaks for itself. Whether I liked Brandon Hewitt or not is irrelevant to those facts. What do you want people to take away from this story? That accountability matters. That rank and privilege don't exempt anyone from basic human decency. And that sometimes doing the right thing means losing things you care about. But you do it anyway because that's what integrity requires. The reporter thanked me and ended the call. I had no idea if she'd use any of it or twist my words into something unrecognizable, but I'd said my piece. That would have to be enough. Around noon, Marcus called. Have you seen the decision? Just got the news this morning. Roy wants to take you to lunch. To celebrate. You free? I smiled. Yeah, I'm free. We met at a small diner on the east side of town, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and waitresses who called everyone honey. Roy was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with Marcus, both of them drinking coffee and looking more relaxed than I'd seen them in weeks. I slid into the booth across from them. Congratulations, Roy said, raising his mug.
Justice was served. We clinked our mugs together in a quiet toast. The waitress came over and we ordered burgers and fries. Comfort food that tasted better than it had any right to. We talked about everything except the hearing. Marcus told stories about his nonprofit work, the success cases that made the hard days worth it. Roy talked about his plans to visit his grandkids in Arizona for Christmas. I talked about an upcoming NATO exercise I was coordinating in Germany, carefully avoiding any classified details, but enjoying the chance to share something about my actual job. After lunch, as we walked to our cars, Roy pulled me aside. I've been thinking about something. Yeah? The fund needs a new board member. Someone with military experience and logistics knowledge. Someone who understands what veterans need and how to navigate bureaucracy to get it. Marcus and I talked it over. We'd like to nominate you. I was stunned. Roy, I don't know if I have time. You don't have to answer now. Just think about it. We meet quarterly, mostly planning and oversight. But having someone like you involved would make a real difference. I'll think about it. That's all we ask. Over the next few days, the media coverage intensified. The Norfolk Tribune ran a front-page story about the hearing, complete with quotes from my interview and reactions from veteran advocacy groups. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. Letters to the editor praised the panel's decision.
Local veteran organizations issued statements commending the military's commitment to accountability. A few defense industry groups complained about overreach and the chilling effect on contractor relations, but their voices were drowned out by the broader consensus. Brandon's name was mentioned repeatedly, always in unflattering contexts. Disgraced contractor, former defense industry partner, the man who assaulted a Korean War veteran. His reputation was in ruins, his career demolished, his future prospects limited to whatever work didn't require security clearances or military connections. Part of me felt bad for him, not because he didn't deserve consequences, but because watching anyone's life implode is never satisfying, even when they've earned it. But then I'd remember Roy lying on the floor with blood trickling from his head. I'd remember Brandon's dismissive tone, his complete lack of remorse, his willingness to destroy anyone who challenged him, and the sympathy would evaporate. Vanessa reached out again 2 weeks after the decision. This time I answered. Hey. Her voice was quiet, strained. I wanted to apologize for what I said, for how I reacted. I was scared and angry, and I took it out on you. I appreciate that. The divorce is moving forward. Brandon's lawyer is trying to drag it out, but I'm done. I can't be married to someone who did what he did, who is who he is. I'm sorry it came to this. Are you? She didn't sound accusatory, just genuinely curious. I'm sorry your marriage ended. I'm not sorry that he's facing consequences for his actions. Those two things can both be true. She was quiet for a moment. I know you think I've been naive about him. And maybe you're right. I made excuses for a long time. I told myself he just had strong opinions, that he was misunderstood. But watching him during the hearing, listening to the things he said about veterans, about Roy, about you, I couldn't pretend anymore. What changed? I don't know. Maybe I finally let myself see what was always there. Or maybe I just got tired of defending the indefensible. We talked for over an hour. It wasn't a full reconciliation, not yet. Too much had been broken, too many things had been said. But it was a start, an acknowledgement that maybe, eventually, we could find our way back to each other. Not as the sisters we used to be, but as the people we'd become. Before we hung up, Vanessa said something that stayed with me. I was wrong about you. I thought you were being rigid and unforgiving. But you were just being honest, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. Thanksgiving came and I spent it at Marcus's house with Roy and a dozen other veterans from the fund. It was loud and chaotic, with too much food and overlapping conversations, and the kind of easy camaraderie that comes from shared experience. No one asked about the hearing. No one brought up Brandon. We just ate and laughed and told stories. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Roy's grandkids called during dinner, and he stepped outside to FaceTime them, his face lighting up as they told him about their college classes and their plans to visit in December. When he came back inside, he had tears in his eyes. They're good kids, he said to no one in particular. I'm proud of them. Marcus raised his glass. To good kids and better futures. We all drank to that. Later, as I was helping clean up, Marcus pulled me aside. Did you think about the board position? I did. And I'd be honored to join. He smiled and clapped me on the shoulder. Welcome aboard, Colonel. December brought snow and the first hints of real winter. Work kept me busy with planning for the Germany exercise, coordinating with NATO partners, and managing the 1,000 small details that went into large-scale military operations. But I also started attending board meetings for the Veterans Relief Fund, learning the nonprofit side of veteran advocacy, and discovering that logistics skills translated surprisingly well to fundraising and program development. Captain Roswell called in mid-December with an update. Brandon's case had been referred to the Norfolk District Attorney's Office. They were pursuing assault charges and expected to bring it to trial in the spring. His attorneys are trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA's office wasn't interested in anything less than a guilty plea with community service and mandatory counseling. How's he doing? Not well from what I hear. He moved out of the house he shared with your sister. He's working some consulting job that doesn't require clearance, making a fraction of what he used to. His reputation in the defense industry is destroyed. No one will touch him. Good. Captain Roswell paused. You know, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen a lot of cases, a lot of officers who witnessed wrongdoing and looked the other way because it was easier, because getting involved meant making enemies, burning bridges, sacrificing relationships. You didn't do that. You stood up even when it cost you everything. That matters. Thank you. On Christmas Eve, I received a card in the mail.
The return address was unfamiliar, but when I opened it, I recognized Roy's shaky handwriting. Dear Tara, I wanted you to know how much your courage meant to me and to all the veterans who've been dismissed, disrespected, and forgotten over the years. You reminded us that some people still believe we matter, that our service wasn't in vain, that dignity and honor still mean something. Thank you for being one of the good ones. Merry Christmas. Roy. I put the card on my refrigerator next to a photo from Thanksgiving. Marcus and Roy and me standing together in front of the Veterans Relief Fund banner. We looked happy. We looked like family. My actual family remained complicated. My mother had reached out cautiously, testing the waters, trying to rebuild without acknowledging the depth of what had broken. My father hadn't spoken to me since the hearing. Vanessa and I talked occasionally, carefully, both of us learning how to be sisters again without pretending the past few months hadn't happened. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and maybe that was better. In January, the Norfolk Tribune published a follow-up piece. The headline read, "When Rank Meets Responsibility: How One Officer's Decision Changed the Conversation About Veteran Advocacy." The article detailed the hearing, the outcome, and the broader implications for how military standards applied to civilian contractors. It quoted veteran advocacy groups praising the decision. It mentioned Roy by name, detailing his service record and his recovery. And it included a full paragraph about the Veterans Relief Fund and the work they were doing. Donations to the fund tripled overnight. Marcus called me laughing, overwhelmed by the response. We might actually have to hire staff, real staff. This is incredible. The article also mentioned that Brandon Hewitt had accepted a plea deal. Guilty plea to simple assault, 6 months probation, 200 hours of community service at a veterans organization, and mandatory anger management counseling. It wasn't prison, but it was public acknowledgement of guilt. It was accountability. I read the article twice, then folded it and put it in a drawer. Not to hide it, but to preserve it. Evidence that sometimes the system worked, that sometimes justice prevailed, that sometimes standing up mattered. February brought my promotion ceremony. I was selected for full colonel, a rank I'd worked toward for years, but honestly hadn't been sure I'd achieve after everything that had happened. The ceremony was small, held at the base chapel with Marcus, Roy, Vanessa, and a few colleagues from work in attendance. My father didn't come. My mother sent flowers with a card that said she was proud, but couldn't get away from work. General Hayes, who'd presided over the hearing, was the one who pinned on my new rank. As she fastened the eagles to my collar, she leaned in and spoke quietly. "You set the standard, Colonel. Don't forget that." "I won't, ma'am." After the ceremony, we all went to the same diner where Roy had taken me months before. We ordered burgers again, raised our coffee mugs again, and celebrated not just the promotion, but everything it represented. The long road, the hard choices, the cost and the payoff. Vanessa sat beside me in the booth, and at one point she squeezed my hand under the table. "I'm proud of you." "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "I think I'm finally starting to understand what integrity looks like, what it costs. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." "You see it now. That's what matters." Spring came slowly, the snow melting into gray slush before finally giving way to green grass and budding trees.
Roy's grandkids visited in March, and I met them at a fund event. Twin girls in their early 20s with their grandfather's quiet strength and sharp intelligence. They hugged me like I was family and thanked me for standing up for their grandpa. "He talks about you all the time," one of them said. "Says you're the real deal." I smiled. "Your grandfather's the real deal. I just did what anyone should have done. But most people don't. That's why it matters." In April, the Veterans Relief Fund hosted their annual gala again. This time, the event was bigger, better funded, and more widely attended. Local news covered it. State representatives showed up. The ballroom was packed with veterans, families, supporters, and advocates. Marcus gave a speech thanking everyone for their support and specifically mentioning the events of the previous year. He didn't name Brandon, but everyone knew what he was referring to. Sometimes it takes one person's courage to remind us all what we're fighting for. This organization exists because people believe veterans deserve dignity, respect, and support. Not just words, action. And this year, we've seen what action looks like. The crowd applauded, and I felt Roy's hand on my shoulder. He was sitting beside me, healthy and strong, his injuries fully healed. He leaned over and whispered, "You changed things, Tara. Don't ever doubt that." Later that night, after the speeches and the awards and the dinner, I stood outside in the cool spring air, watching people stream out of the venue. Happy faces, hopeful conversations, veterans connecting with resources and support networks, families finding community. Captain Roswell found me out there, leaning against the building with her own drink in hand. Hell of a year. Yeah? Any regrets? I thought about that question, about everything I'd lost, the family relationships that remained fractured, the easy path I'd walked away from, the comfortable invisibility I'd traded for public scrutiny. No regrets. She smiled. Good, because you've inspired about a dozen other officers to start speaking up about conduct violations they've been witnessing. Your case set a precedent. Standards matter. Accountability matters. People are paying attention now. I hadn't considered that, hadn't thought about the ripple effects beyond Roy, beyond Brandon, beyond my own small circle. But maybe that was the real victory. Not just one case, one hearing, one decision, but a shift in how people thought about responsibility and courage. Marcus came outside and joined us. "Roy's looking for you, wants to introduce you to someone." I followed him back inside to where Roy stood talking with a young Marine in dress blues, maybe 25 years old, with the careful posture of someone still learning to navigate the world after combat. Roy waved me over. "Tara, this is Corporal Chin. He just got back from deployment, dealing with some transition challenges. I told him you might be able to help connect him with resources." We shook hands and talked for a while. Corporal Chin had been a logistics specialist in Okinawa, was struggling to find civilian work that matched his skills, and was feeling isolated and adrift. I gave him my contact information, connected him with Marcus's housing program, and promised to reach out to some contacts in the private sector who were actively hiring veterans.
After he left, Roy smiled at me. This is what it's all about. One connection at a time. One person helping another. I nodded, feeling the weight and the lightness of it all at once. The responsibility and the privilege of being in a position to help, of having the rank, the knowledge, the network to make a difference. The evening wound down and people started heading home. I helped Marcus and his volunteers break down tables and clean up. Roy hugged me goodbye and reminded me about the board meeting next week. Vanessa, who had attended the gala as my guest, walked me to my car. "Thank you for inviting me tonight. I'm glad you came." She hesitated, keys in hand. "I've been thinking about volunteering." "With the fund? Maybe I could help with fundraising or event planning. I don't know if Marcus would want me after everything with Brandon, but I'd like to try." "I think he'd be happy to have you. The fund can always use people with your organizational skills." She smiled, and for the first time in months, it looked genuine. "I want to do something that matters, something I can be proud of. Like you." We hugged briefly and went our separate ways, the night air cool and full of possibility. I drove home through quiet streets, the city lights reflecting off rain-wet pavement. My phone buzzed with a text from Captain Roswell. Forgot to mention, Brandon's probation officer reported that he's been doing his community service at a homeless veterans shelter, apparently showing up on time, working hard, keeping his head down. Maybe he's actually learning something. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Maybe. Time will tell." Because that was the truth. Consequences weren't just about punishment. They were about opportunity. The chance to face what you'd done wrong and choose to become better. Whether Brandon took that opportunity was up to him, but at least now he had the chance. I pulled into my parking space and sat for a moment before going inside. The past year had been the hardest of my life. I'd lost relationships I'd thought were permanent. I'd been accused, scrutinized, and doubted. I'd stood in front of a panel and defended my choices while my own father testified against me. But I'd also found something I hadn't expected. A community of people who understood what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, to stand for something bigger than yourself. I'd found purpose beyond rank and duty. I'd found family in places I hadn't thought to look.
And I'd learned that integrity wasn't about being perfect or always getting it right. It was about doing the hard thing even when it cost you everything. It was about standing up when it would be easier to sit down. It was about choosing honor over comfort, truth over convenience, justice over peace. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Roy. Thank you for tonight. Thank you for everything. You're one of the good ones, Colonel. I smiled and typed back, so are you, Roy. So are you. I went inside, changed into comfortable clothes, and made myself tea. I sat on my small balcony overlooking the city, wrapped in a blanket, watching lights twinkle in distant windows. Somewhere out there, Brandon was probably figuring out his next move. Vanessa was probably planning her new life. My parents were probably still trying to make sense of what had happened. And here I was, Colonel Tara Sullivan, sitting alone but not lonely, tired but not defeated, changed but not broken.
I'd stayed silent about my rank for 3 years, hiding in plain sight, avoiding complications and conflicts. But the moment someone disrespected a veteran in front of me, the moment dignity and honor were on the line, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. And I'd do it again, every single time. Because some things are worth fighting for. Some battles are worth losing everything to win. And some truths are worth telling no matter how much they cost. I finished my tea, went inside, and finally let myself rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, I could simply be grateful for the hard-won peace of knowing I'd done the right thing. Even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. That's when it mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.